welcome to this ET Now special. It's a budget day and we are with India's first full-time woman finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, who presented her maiden budget and also broke tradition by giving away to that colonial legacy of holding a briefcase, ma'am. So in that sense, new beginnings to a new India. With us also is living legend Swaminathan Aiyar, and it would be only appropriate that I let Swami sir ask the first question. Over to you, sir.
There are a number of new features in the budget. One new idea is that instead of borrowing domestically and raising interest rates, you are going to be borrowing abroad. Could you tell us how much are you going to borrow this year, how much in the next 5 years, so that we have an idea of the overall plan?
A bit too early for me to get into the details of how much, because I'd rather hold it for a while. But the logic with which we did this was because we repeatedly in several of our multilateral meetings and also bilateral meetings, it was getting obvious that in the euro market and in the yen, there was definitely a flush of funds, and they were not probably finding good opportunities to invest. If that is one side of the story, the other side of the story was we have ever so many projects, all of which are waiting for funds. And if they are, for want of good returns, holding back, we for want of resources are stuck where we are. So we thought we can make a genuinely good attempt at tapping these resources. And when we looked at our own records, the external borrowing is rather minuscule. So we wanted to make the two things come together so that the country can benefit.
Ma'am, if I could ask you one question, which is that going into the budget day, we all thought, will we deviate from the fiscal glide path? You have surprised everyone by actually lowering the ambitious target, which is already being seen that. Also, when there was a belief that maybe the revenue targeted earlier would see a shortfall. Ma'am, can you tell us what is this extra mobilization which is going to come from, primarily disinvestment, or could it also perhaps be something that you're expecting from the RBI in the form of the surplus transfer?
2-3 things. You packed your question with so many things on which I have to respond. The tax revenue estimates being what they are, as we very clearly said, I think 17.5 or 17.7 for the direct taxes, and about 15.5 for the indirect, we thought was a realistic expectation that we can lay for ourselves. Even with those realistic expectations, we are confident that our revenue generation will be on a good positive note, one thing. Second, it was felt probably the figures in the interim was not realistic, it was too rather ambitious. But I would like to say now, and also give the figures which have come out, is if you were expecting double digit in some areas, maybe not double digit, but we are still on the 9%, 8% level of increase between comparison between last year and this year. So there is no slowdown in the revenue generation. It is happening and good number. It's not at 1 or 2%, it's touching a decent 7-8%. So revenue generation is not worrying in that sense. Second is we've given ourselves realistic expectations. Disinvestment, as I said, is about 25,000 crores more in terms of the expectation that we've given ourselves, target that we've given. 90,000 was earlier, now it's about a 1,05,000. So everywhere we've given ourselves such figures which are eminently achievable. So we are confident that we will make the level to which we have to reach. That's one. Second, on the FRBM, there was this debate, not just this year, there's been an ongoing debate saying what is so sacred about the 3%? Or why should you have a gliding path to reach it? Although we know that it's been given and that's what we have to comply and follow. I'm not for a minute deviating from it. But the narrative and the discussion which is going on around would be for a country like India, where developmental requirements and jobs all demand you to be a bit more generous with your purse. Why should you restrict yourself because of this FRBM constraint that you have on your head? I am here to have a complete compliance of the law. FRBM is a law. I have to obey it. So I will obey it, and the glide path is sacred for me. I will maintain it. And that is why this time I have made it a point, in spite of the several commitments in expenditure, welfare measures, which are all richly deserving, I have made sure that the fiscal deficit will go through the gliding path, and today we are at 3.3. Of course, I didn't, I realized well after I finished my speech that I missed out on reading it. Yes. Normally the speech, the last bit would be on FRBM, I mean fiscal deficit. For what reason it wasn't there in my speech, because till the last minute I was under the impression that I've read the last line with it in my proofreading stage. But since it wasn't there, and I thought it was my business to get up and say that I've complied, I've not violated any discipline, so I got up to say it. So no, I recognize the importance there.
70,000 crores for bank capitalization. It will certainly help the banks to revive lending in a big way. What is the phasing? Over how many years? How much this year? How much second year? How much third year?
I would think it will be about 3 years.
3 years.
But
first year will be how much?
I wouldn't be able to break it down now. You'll get to know a bit later. During the parliamentary debates, I will be able to expand on it and give you the figure for it. And similarly, we've also attended to the NBFC crisis. In that, you didn't ask me, but I have
well, yes, it's part of the same package.
Yes, same thing. Because on the NBFC, the government had been spending a lot of time monitoring, looking at what's happening to completely comprehensively address the issue. But at the same time, without understanding all its dimension, we didn't want to get into it. It was obvious that when I had my stakeholder consultation during the pre-budget preparation, it was obvious some eminent names, I don't want to take each of their names, but all of them clearly saying it's not a simple one problem. It is an issue of solvency for some, it's governance for some other NBFCs, a third may suffer from want of liquidity, but it's not one problem affecting all, it's one problem affecting some, maybe a different problem affecting somebody. So then we looked at what were the immediate things that we had to do. One was for clearly making sure that the regulatory and resolutionary powers were in the right place. And that is the reason why in this finance bill, we are moving it all to RBI. And that's true of even the National Housing Bank related powers. So that is moving out. And similarly, we have given a window which can be opened by the Reserve Bank, for which we are giving a 10% backstop arrangement. So with that, I hope those suffering for want of liquidity will be able to get it. But for those who are not suffering from liquidity, there is a positive message going that on that sector we have responded. So it's not as if the performing ones will have to doubly perform now and those who are languishing will be languishing. Not at all. We want the entire sector to get a message that we've attended to.
The RBI excess capital was something we were anxiously looking forward to, because this could be a very large sum of money. The Vimal Jalan committee has not yet submitted its report. Yet you must be having some kind of assumptions, some kind of presumptions. Have you built that presumption into the budget? If not, is this going to be an additional supplementary budget afterwards?
No. We've built in some estimated figure.
How much?
In fact, it was interesting. I was telling myself 85,000. The finance secretary during the press conference after the budget presentation said 90,000. So it must be in that range.
Okay. So ma'am, with what you're going to get from the Reserve Bank of India, and more importantly what you have announced as far as RBI versus NBFC goes, which is considered to be one of the biggest pain points in the economy, do you think you have done enough to spur investments and to spur growth? Because going into the budget day, there has been a concern that the economy is in a slowdown.
I've heard this several times, and I'm not rejecting any of what is being observed, but yet I will draw your attention to the fact that India still is the fastest growing economy globally, and we do not want to do anything that is going to upset that growth. And on the contrary, I'd rather do everything that it takes to make sure that growth is sustained at that or even higher level. And therefore, to say that I wouldn't have done anything or I haven't done much for spurring growth, I can understand it because I've taken a very different way of probably presenting the budget. But the documents, the annex to the speech, all of which goes into every detail that you would otherwise, you and people like Swaminathan can go into great detail and tell us what they read in between the lines. But then the fact is, the way in which we have approached the spurring of the growth matter is we are going to put more money in the hands of the people through the time tested method which we have done in the last 5 years of investing in public spending for infrastructure. And that is not just roads, we are looking at greenfield airport, brownfield airport, Sagarmala, inland waterways, infrastructure in various different ways. On the other, through the direct benefit transfer, we are definitely moving to literally reaching with money to the hands of the last man in the queue. Over and above that, you saw we have given tax deductions for those who are buying affordable houses, increased the amount. We have also given the same approach for electrical vehicles so that incentive is given, benefit reaches the common man with the consciousness that we have to be careful about environment. So in a way, and startups being given the kind of tax concessions that I've given should actually make startups feel a lot more energetic.
Yeah.
And the kind of worries that they had about particularly angel tax, that's been completely removed now. So
in fact, a strong message to the tax department as far as angel tax or even faceless.
Right.
That should come through this year.
Yes. A major policy change that, shall we bring down the holding in some public sector undertakings below 51%? Very important. Any idea, if you could name just 2 or 3 of them? Secondly, when you lower the public sector shareholding, when Yashwant Sinha was finance minister, he said we may keep a golden share. We may reduce our shareholding in banks down to 30, but keep a golden share for control. So is the golden share under consideration if you reduce to 51%?
Not really golden share line of thinking, but when we have very clearly said, if there are other government agencies which are holding shares in the same company and government also holds, should the 51 be only on the shoulders of the government or government owned also?
Right.
So together, if it's possible to hold 51 and release, for instance, the rest for common retail shareholders to hold it, your Jan Bhagidari actually takes shape, and the spirit is kept of Jan Bhagidari by doing that.
You get out of CVC and other problems also.
No, we have to have a clear framework on it.
Yeah.
Ma'am,
but no companies, you can't name any.
I won't name any companies. The parliament in session, I don't want to do it outside. But
in fact, I tried very hard with the Disinvestment Secretary to get the names as well in a separate interview. He didn't do that, but he did mention Air India is not part of the 1,05,000 crores.
That's right.
So, ma'am, that will be a challenge. You got jet.
But to give you a clue, disinvestment, not so much just the 51, but disinvestment, we will make sure that everything that which has been given the CCA approval, that list of companies for which approval was obtained in principle, will be undertaken.
All will go.
So all the CCA approval companies.
But that included Air India.
No, Air India was separate. Aside from Air India, there was a list.
Okay.
So, ma'am, what I also found interesting was, so far the government has been taking special permission from the Reserve Bank of India to not meet that minimum public shareholding norm of 25%. You in your budget speech have said you're going to request the SEBI chairman to perhaps increase that threshold to 35%. So that's also a setting of sorts for the public sector undertakings, I would imagine, because we've seen special permission being requested in the past.
That's right. I suppose in the larger context, in this budget, we've tried opening up as much as possible, easing out as much as possible, and making sure that minimum governance principle is adhered to. And as a result, I've picked up on very many such things, some of which are paradigm shifts, as they say, like for the external borrowing. So this is one such a thing in which where we thought if you're taking one step now, you don't wait for the next one. There could be several steps, all of which gives a big picture of where this country has to be and where we would want to work. And that is why we have mentioned several of these things.
When Arun Jaitley was presenting, I think, his first budget, he said we have to be able to compete on tax rates with our competitors in Southeast Asia. Therefore, we must bring down our rates to that level. At that time, he said bring it down to 25. By now, the Southeast Asians are down to below 20. Secondly, their income tax rates are much lower. When we have in this budget, you have just increased them.
Not for everybody.
No, not for everybody, but for the big investors who are relevant, who would be producing the most tax. After all, that's why you've done it, because you want the revenue. But for those people, you have become uncompetitive. So the question is there not a danger that you are making the economy uncompetitive compared with our neighbors?
I don't think. See, the difficulty arises, I'm not finding a fault, but the difficulty arises when you raise one of them and say you put people in disadvantage, they will be no longer competitive, and therefore this is not doing any good. You have to place it in the context of so many other things that we have done which enhances their competitiveness. For instance, one classic example which I also quoted in the budget speech was of the GST. The rate reductions in GST for manufacturing units, for service sector, all of which today can tell you a story of 94,000 crores which have really been given as a benefit, in other words, by not asking them to pay me a tax which would have otherwise given me 94,000 crores. Is that not making them competitive? And therefore, any time we speak about increasing the competitiveness of Indian industry, small, medium, big, large, whoever, there are several factors which go into the making of it. I need each one of the factors to be addressed, and I concede that. But if there is one factor on which something has been done, it may not be proper to think that the competitiveness wholly will be affected. The glide path on the corporate taxation is still being maintained. Now it's only 0.7 companies, 7% companies, 0.7% companies which have still not reached the 25 level. But for others have done it. What started in 2014 on the 25% corporate tax which you quoted just now is now complied with, not just up to 250 crores but even 400 crores.
But the others, their competitors have gone down below 20.
No, others, it's not personal income tax.
No, I'm talking about corporate tax rates. Some are just 15 to 20 effective rate. So the question is, if you're going to be competitive, you need to follow them rather
right.
than just the original.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Ma'am, was there a particular reason why you chose maybe not to give a roadmap as far as this corporate tax rate cut goes? There were a lot of expectations on this front. You're saying that you've taken care of most of them, but when
Hardly 0.7% are left
but those are the big ones, no?
That's okay. We are giving a lot of relief anyway for many of the industries.
And ma'am, the other question that, we've got a lot of this also on social media, for instance. For the last 5 years, this is a government that has thanked the honest taxpayers. Especially after demonetization, the goods and services tax, it was also promised we will continue to reward the honest taxpayers. Yesterday, the chief economic advisor has come out with a suggestion, why not give them VIP privileges, name roads after them. Ma'am, by when do you think that for the salaried class or those not up to 5 lakhs, they will be rewarded?
Only 4 months ago, up to 5 lakhs happened.
I'm saying for the others.
No, I understand. So, yes, in a calibrated fashion, we'll have to approach. Every time they cannot be just for the salaried class. We have to look at every class also. So it will happen.
Okay.
There is this overall question of what happens on agriculture. The earlier attempt to keep raising MSPs in line with Swaminathan committee, which I would have regarded as a disaster because it was making your prices uncompetitive. Are we going to then switch from that to direct benefit transfer? Because this has been done everywhere in the world. In America, in Europe, in Japan, people are moving away from support for the product prices, which results in this excess production. So will we continue on this path that we have very moderate MSP increases, abandoning the Swaminathan committee report, and shift instead to direct benefit transfer?
Well, at the moment there's no discussion on it. There are different discussions on modernizing agriculture, getting farmer, getting double the income and so on. But on this specific thing, nothing is being discussed as yet.
I see.
Now, would it be a fair observation to say that the public-private partnership model is making a comeback?
We like to, at least in very many, as I said, for the railways. We see it as one of the things which can resolve the crisis of capital requirement for modernization of railways. And so with many other things that we have specified, we are quite open about private PPP model, and recently TOT, PPP model, all of which are getting proof that it is workable.
Because this is almost a change in stance. Because how much can the public expenditure? That's right. So ma'am, the next question then is, I asked you about spurring investment, but do you think, and you know, like I said, this is in the middle of the year, enough been done to convince the private sector to invest? Because that has also been a major problem.
I think convincing the private sector to invest is being done in so many different ways, rather than telling them on their face, come invest. We are not doing that. That's ultimately their decision. But I think we are making sure that the ecosystem is much more positive. There is a great, regulatory mechanism which is not curbing, but which is monitoring any malpractice. So there is a positive approach towards giving that ecosystem with which private entrepreneurs, private investors would feel confident to come and invest. And I think many of the reform steps, legislative or otherwise, that we are moving ahead with will assure them. And that's why I made it a point to say India Inc. is something which we need to have trust with, mutual trust. We look up to them to say, you're the wealth creators of the country, you are the job creators of the country. We need to work together for India. So that I made a special mention of.
In the beginning, in fact.
You've raised the import duties on several items like happened in the last two budgets. So there is this fear that we are going towards increasing protectionism.
Not at all.
But then if you keep increasing import duties, then...
No, it is only for those commodities which are being produced in India, maybe who need that little support from us for some more time. For those products, if we are going to have goods come into the country, those manufacturers here may not be able to survive. We want them to be sure that they are competitive enough to face the market. After all, even in India now, with global tendering in most of the things, purchase is based on an international qualitative standard. So those manufacturers in India, if they are not able to rise to that level of meeting the standards of procurement, they'll anyway have to change their approach to their production. So we want to give them a fair chance, so that we don't import those goods which they are fully capable of making, if only given a bit more support.
But then
it's only for that.
Sunset clauses are not there.
Well, the details can be worked out and we can see, but then we are very clear that these are brought in with that intention, and also with the intention that if it is possibly available in India, why should we be increasing our import bill? That's about it.
Ma'am, the final question, because I know you have to go, I'll make it a slightly lighter one, if you permit, sir. 5 weeks almost, just a little over 5 weeks to present the budget. You're going down in history as India's first full-time woman finance minister. Must have been one challenging task, ma'am, like getting all of this together. How did you do it? If you can give us some behind-the-scenes insights.
No, first to the credit of the Ministry of Finance, I think the institutional mechanism within this ministry are so well laid out. Each one silo knows what they have to do, when they have to interface with others and so on. So that actually made my job easier, one. And second, even to the extent that, for instance, you go and see the printer down in the cellar, the quarantined area. Nearly 100 people are there for the last 10 days getting the budget documents ready. The dedication, we know the process runs. There is no slippage anywhere. So the ministry is well sort of institutionalized its systems, that it's easy for anyone to come in and join in to, be a part of that mechanism. But with that said, yes, it was an intensive phase of learn even as you are in the fire, So, but they've all been very cooperative and helpful.
And was it your decision, ma'am, to not have that masculine briefcase, that old colonial tradition?
Yes, absolutely. My decision, my family's decision. They thought it's high time that we gotten over the colonial hangover.
Jaswant Singh brought only a file. He abandoned it actually when he was finance minister.
So I made it a point to get over, and of course my parents thought, if you were really going to leave the suitcase, here we go, we do this. So this was handmade by my mommy.
That's a beautiful story.
She did it herself.
Okay, that's a lovely story. Ma'am, with that, we'd like to thank you for joining us here in ET Now to Decode the Budget. Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.